The morning Diane Kowalski walked out of that conference room, she carried nothing but a small cardboard box and her daughter's school photo taped to the inside of the lid. 12 years. 12 years of early mornings and late nights, of skipped vacations and missed school plays, of putting Hartwell Financial Group before everything else in her life. And they had handed her a termination letter on a Tuesday. Not even a Friday. A Tuesday, like she was an inconvenience they wanted to clear before the weekend. Her manager, Frank Obert, hadn't even looked her in the eye. He'd slid the envelope across the conference table and said, "The company is restructuring. We appreciate your contributions." Then his assistant had appeared at the door, already holding a building access card in a small plastic bag, waiting to escort her out. Her colleague Bridget had watched from behind her monitor as Diane crossed the open floor. Bridget, who had borrowed Diane's lunch at least 40 times. Bridget, whose quarterly reports Diane had quietly corrected more times than she could count. Bridget hadn't said a word, neither had the others. Only Tom from the mailroom had nodded at her near the elevator. A small serious nod, like he understood something the rest of them didn't. Outside on the sidewalk, the October air hit her face and she stood very still for a moment. People moved around her in both directions. A cab honked. Someone's coffee smelled like cinnamon. And Diane Kowalski, 41 years old, single mother of one 7-year-old girl named Rose, with a mortgage she'd been barely keeping up with for 2 years, stood on the corner of 5th and Madison and thought, "I cannot fall apart right now. I have to pick up Rose at 3:15. So she didn't fall apart. She got on the subway. She watched a woman knit something blue across the aisle. She counted the stops. When she got off, she walked to the school, stood at the gate with the other parents, and smiled when Rose came running out with a drawing of a horse she'd made in art class. "It's a mare," Rose explained very seriously, pointing at the crayon mane. "Mares are the girl ones." "I know, baby. Can we get hot chocolate?" "Not today." Rose accepted this without argument, which was somehow the hardest part of the afternoon. That night, after Rose was asleep, Diane sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and a cup of tea that had gone cold and looked at their bank account. Then she looked at it again. She pulled up the mortgage statement, the car payment, the after-school program fees, Rose's dentist appointment next month. She opened a spreadsheet and started typing numbers, and when she got to the bottom she closed the laptop and pressed her palms flat on the table and breathed. She had maybe 4 months. Maybe 5, if she was careful and lucky and nothing broke. Her ex-husband, Kevin, called that evening. He'd heard through someone at a mutual friend's wedding that she'd been let go. "That's rough," he said, in the tone he used when he didn't want to get involved. "If you need to adjust the arrangement for Rose temporarily, we're fine," Diane said. "I'm just saying." "I said we're fine, Kevin." She hung up and stared at the ceiling for a while. Here's what almost nobody knew about Diane Kowalski, including the people she had worked beside for over a decade. 3 years before Frank Obert slid that termination letter across the table, Diane had quietly started something on the side. Not because she was ambitious in a way she broadcasted. Not because she had a 5-year plan she talked about at dinner parties. She'd started it because Rose had been sick for 2 months straight. Ear infections turning into something more serious. And Diane had spent so many hours in waiting rooms, in pediatric offices with outdated magazines and overhead lights that hummed, that she'd started building a tool on her phone to track symptoms, medications, timing and doctor's notes in a way that actually made sense. She'd shown it to a nurse at their pediatrician's office, almost as an afterthought. The nurse had looked at it for a long time. "Who made this?" the nurse asked. "I did." "Are you a developer?" "I'm a financial analyst." The nurse had looked at her. "This is better than what we use." Diane had gone home and thought about that for 3 weeks. Then she'd called her college friend Priya, who was a software engineer in Austin, and said, "I have an idea. I need to know if it's crazy." It wasn't crazy. It was in fact the kind of idea that felt obvious once you heard it, and made you wonder why no one had done it properly yet. A care coordination platform specifically built around the parent's experience hit. Not the clinical workflow. Not the billing department's needs, but the actual human being who was managing a sick child across multiple providers, multiple appointments, multiple pharmacy pickups, across a calendar that never stopped. They had built it slowly, evenings. Early Saturday mornings while Rose watched cartoons. Priya handled the technical architecture. Diane handled everything else, the user experience, the financial modeling, the conversations with 3 pediatric practices in New Jersey, who agreed to pilot the platform. She had told no one at Hartwell, not because she was hiding it, but because she had learned, early on, that people have a way of talking something out of existence, before it gets the chance to prove itself. For 2 years it had been a quiet thing. A careful thing. A thing she worked on after she checked on Rose and before she let herself sleep. And then, 8 months before Frank Obert restructured Diane out of her position, something had shifted. The pilot data came back. The numbers were not small numbers. One of the practices had seen a 38% reduction in missed follow-up appointments. Parents were re-enrolling at a rate the practice manager called basically unheard of. A health system in Pennsylvania had reached out, asking about a potential partnership. And then, in September, a venture firm out of Boston had sent Priya a very short email that contained a very large number. Diane had read that email on her phone, standing in the Hartwell elevator on a Wednesday morning, on her way up to the 14th floor to review a client's quarterly portfolio. She had read it twice. Then she had ridden the rest of the way up in silence and reviewed the portfolio and not said a single word about it to anyone. She had told herself she would deal with it carefully, thoughtfully. After the holidays maybe. When the timing was right. The timing, it turned out, had been decided for her. The weeks after the termination were the hardest stretch Diane had experienced since the first year after Kevin left. When Rose was barely 2, and the apartment felt too large and too quiet at the same time. She applied for positions she was overqualified for. She updated her LinkedIn in a way that felt like dressing a wound in public. She drove Rose to school, came home, worked on the platform, picked Rose up, made dinner, helped with homework, and fell asleep every night calculating numbers she didn't like. But she didn't stop. That was the thing about Diane that the people at Hartwell had never fully understood. She did not stop. In November, she signed the term sheet with the Boston firm. She and Priya drove up on a Thursday. The meeting was in a glass building near the waterfront, and there were 8 people in the room. All of them with opinions and questions and follow-up questions, and Diane answered every one of them, in a way that was calm and exact, because she had been living inside these numbers for 3 years, and she knew them the way you know a room you've slept in your whole life. On the drive back, Priya turned down the radio and said, "Diane, do you understand what just happened in there?" "I understand. Do you actually understand?" Diane watched the highway for a moment. "I think so. We just closed an 8-figure round. We are a company. An actual company with an actual valuation and an actual board." Priya hit the steering wheel lightly with both palms. "We did this." Diane smiled. She thought about Rose. She thought about the mare drawing, still hanging on the refrigerator. She thought about that nurse in the pediatrician's office looking at her phone and asking, "Who made this?" "Yeah," she said, "we did." She didn't post about it. She didn't call anyone from Hartwell. She didn't update her LinkedIn. She went home, picked up Rose from after school, made spaghetti, and helped Rose practice reading until they both got sleepy on the couch. The call came in January. She was at the grocery store, in the cereal aisle, comparing 2 boxes of the same cereal at different prices, when her phone rang. It was a number she didn't know, with a Chicago area code. "Miss Kowalski? This is Helen Marsh, executive assistant to Richard Carver at Vantage Health Systems." Diane set both cereal boxes back on the shelf. "We've been following the early data from your platform with considerable interest," Helen said. "Mr. Carver would like to schedule a call with you and your co-founder at your earliest convenience to discuss a potential strategic partnership." Vantage Health Systems. Diane knew the name the way everyone in healthcare-adjacent finance knew the name. They were in 32 states. They were the kind of organization that didn't call people. People called them. "Of course," Diane said. "I'll have my assistant reach out to coordinate." She did not have an assistant. She hired one the following Monday. The partnership meeting was scheduled for February, at Vantage's regional headquarters in the city. Diane had been to that building before. She had processed investment reports involving Vantage's portfolio during her last 2 years at Hartwell. She had sat in the lobby once, waiting to deliver documents to a client, and watched the executives come and go through the glass doors. She had never imagined walking in as anything other than a courier. What she didn't know until the morning of the meeting was that Frank Obert's consulting firm had been retained by Vantage 3 months earlier. He was on the working group that had been tasked with evaluating potential technology acquisitions. He would be in the room. She found this out from Priya, who texted her at 7 a.m. as Diane was doing Rose's ponytail before school. "Heads up, just check the attendee list, Obert is on it." Diane finished the ponytail, secured the elastic, smoothed a strand back from Rose's forehead. "You okay, Mom?" Rose asked, looking at her in the bathroom mirror. "I'm good, Bug." Diane kissed the top of her head. "I'm really good." The Vantage building had a lobby that made the Hartwell offices look modest. Marble floors, 20-foot ceilings. A reception desk staffed by 2 people who wore matching blazers. Diane checked in. Priya arrived 2 minutes later in the same measured stride she always had. They were escorted to the executive conference suite on the 22nd floor. Richard Carver was already in the room when they arrived. He was in his 60s, trim, with the kind of handshake that means something. He introduced himself and introduced the others at the table, going around the room. Frank Obert was at the far end. He looked exactly the same as the last time she'd seen him. Same haircut, same beige confidence. It took him a moment to register who she was. She could see it happen, the recognition arriving late, like a car pulling into a parking spot it hadn't meant to choose. "Diane," he said. "Frank," she said. "Good to see you." Then she turned back to Richard Carver and opened her presentation. For the next 2 hours, Diane walked the room through everything. The origin of the platform, the pediatric pilot data, the retention numbers, the expansion timeline, the architecture of the system and why it was built the way it was built. She answered questions with precision. She corrected 2 assumptions politely and factually. At one point, Frank made a comment about scalability that revealed he hadn't fully read the technical documentation. And Diane addressed it directly, without heat, and moved on. Priya presented the engineering roadmap. The room was attentive in the way that rooms are when they're listening to something they believe in. At the end, Richard Carver leaned back in his chair and looked at both of them. "I'll be direct," he said. "We've been looking at Heartwarming solutions in space for 18 months. Nothing we've seen has combined the clinical outcome data with the parent experience design the way yours has. We'd like to talk about a full acquisition." The number his CFO put on the table was not the kind of number Diane had been calculating in kitchen table spreadsheets 9 months ago. It was significantly larger. She felt Priya go very still beside her. Diane nodded once, slowly. "We're open to that conversation." Frank said nothing for the remainder of the meeting. On the way out, he fell into step beside her in the hallway near the elevators. "I had no idea," he said. "When you left Hartwell, we didn't know you had this." "No," Diane agreed. "You didn't." He seemed to want to say something else. She waited a beat, then pressed the elevator button. "Diane, listen, Frank," she said. And her voice was easy, unhurried the way it had been all morning. "I really don't have anything hard feelings about. You did what you needed to do, so did I." She paused. "Take care of yourself." The elevator opened, she stepped in. Priya was already inside. Having come through a separate door, she looked at Diane. "You okay?" Priya asked. "More than okay." The elevator descended. Priya exhaled. He looked like he needed a paper bag to breathe into. Diane laughed, a real one, short and surprised. The first real laugh she'd had in months. He did. When they came through the lobby and out the front doors, there was a car waiting at the curb. Not because Diane had arranged something theatrical. Just a town car they'd booked for the day. Because parking downtown was a headache and they had 2 more calls that afternoon. The driver stepped out and opened the door and said, "Mems, Kowalski, ready when you are." A group of people coming out of the building behind them paused, because in cities, people notice things like that. A car and a driver and 2 women who walk like they have somewhere important to be. Diane didn't notice them. She was already on her phone, checking the time, calculating how long the next call would take, thinking about what she needed to pick up before she got Rose at 3:15. Rose, who that morning had hugged her before getting out of the car at school and said, without any particular reason, "Mom, I think today's going to be a really good day." Diane had watched her run through the school doors, backpack bouncing, ponytail swinging. She had thought, "You have no idea." She was wrong. It was better. 2 months later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, Diane sat on the living room floor with Rose, while Rose colored, and Diane read through a document that had the word acquisition on the cover page. And a lot of very precise language on every page after it. Outside it was the specific gray of early March, the kind that makes indoor lamps feel warm and necessary. The apartment smelled like the soup that had been in the slow cooker since morning. "Mom," Rose said, without looking up from her coloring book. "Yeah, bug. Are we rich now?" Diane looked at her. Rose was still coloring, a tiger, orange and careful. "We're okay," Diane said. Rose considered this, like okay, or okay like before. Diane set the document down. She thought about how to answer that in a way that was true and also something a 7-year-old could hold. "Different okay," she finally said. "Better okay." Rose nodded, satisfied. "Good. Because I want a dog. I know you want a dog. His name would be Captain, you've told me. He would sleep on my bed." "Rose, and yours sometimes." Diane looked at her daughter, this small, serious person who had ridden the subway without complaint and eaten plain pasta 3 nights in a row without asking why, and once, during a particularly bad week last fall, had found her mother sitting on the kitchen floor at midnight and had sat down beside her without a word and just leaned her head against Diane's arm. She pulled Rose into her side and pressed her lips to her hair. "We'll talk about Captain," she said. Rose made a sound of cautious optimism. They sat together on the floor, while the lamp made the room warm. And the soup finished cooking. And outside the March clouds moved in the slow way they move when you're not watching them. And inside the apartment, on the 23rd page of a very significant document, there was a number with more digits than Diane Kowalski had spent most of her life believing she was allowed to have. She had not gotten here by being loud. She had not gotten here by announcing herself or making her plans visible to people who would have found 100 reasons why they wouldn't work. She had gotten here the same way she had gotten through every hard year before this one. By showing up, by doing the next thing, by not letting fear or exhaustion, or a Tuesday termination, in a conference room, become the end of her story. The apartment was quiet except for Rose's crayon on paper and the low sound of something good on the stove. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was in fact, everything.